And good evening. I'm Darrell Douglas. Thank you for joining us for tonight's conversation with the candidates. This is a joint effort by the League of Women Voters of Texas Education Fund and the League of Women Voters Houston Education Fund. In a little bit, we'll talk to candidates that are running for Texas Attorney General. The first candidate we have tonight is Mr. Sam Houston. Who are you and why are you running?
Thank you, Darrell. I'm Sam Houston. That's really my name. Everybody always laughs about that, but it's really my name. And I'm running for Texas Attorney General, and I'll give you the concise answer. I'm running because I think that I can bring my skills as a lawyer. I have a lot of skills. Take those skills and put them into the Attorney General's office and really take the politics out of it. Make it more the office for the people, which I think is where we need to get back to, and improve on our government and one of the more powerful law offices in the state.
Very good. One thing that we do want to mention, each of the candidates, all the candidates that are on the ballot were invited to come out, and you were one of the ones that decided to come. What made you decide to run for office in the first place? And can you take us back to that moment where you said, okay, that's it, I'm doing it?
Well, you know, these things kind of build on themselves, on what you do. And as we were talking about it, I've been a lawyer for 26 years, and I take my job and my profession, and I call it a profession, very seriously. I've done a lot of the things that lawyers need to do as a civil lawyer, tried the cases, resolved disputes for people, and I think really helped people. I've also become interested in politics. I'm a lifelong Democrat. I believe strongly in the ideals of the Democratic Party, though I like to say that I have a lot of family members who are Republican, and I've worked with both sides, and I really try to think that I'm more just a kind of common sense, pragmatic person. So really in 2008 was the first time I ran for office. So I want to say, I'm not trying to say, I'm trying to build up to why I decided to run for Attorney General. In 2008, really, I'd been working a lot with Democratic politics here in Houston and Harris County, and said a lot of things about how we always need to run strong candidates. We need to do this. You know, even though the Democrats have not won statewide in a long time, it's imperative that we run and continue to run for the whole system. And I can't remember who, someone said, well, you need to put your money where your mouth is and do it and run. And I decided to run for the court then. I thought it was the right thing to do. I thought I had the skill set to do it, though I was concerned because I hadn't been a judge. But I still think that that would have been an important thing to change. The Texas Supreme Court had been, I guess not dominated, but I guess had been run by Republicans. All 9 judges are Republicans for a long time. Learned a lot, ran a hard race, got about 46% of the vote, which is actually a fairly large percentage for Democrats. It's one of the higher percentages, and a lot of people told me that. But then it wasn't going to run again, to be honest with you. I have a teenage boy and a soon-to-be teenage girl, so I'm pretty busy. And but this came up this year, and when Wendy Davis had announced, and the more of the excitement came up, the Attorney General race seemed to be open. I didn't see any state reps or senators stepping in. I felt like it's important again that we run all races, talk to the party, talk to the participants, to Wendy, to talk to different people, and decided that, you know, with everything that needs to be done and for the reasons I'll talk about, that I would get into the race and give it my very best. And I guess I decided shortly before I announced that I would do it, and then thankfully didn't get a primary opponent. So.
Okay.
That's where I started. I kind of built up to it, but it's kind of more, I can't just say I had an epiphany one day and jumped up and did this.
So tell me this, you talked about your teenage boy and your soon-to-be teenage girl. What do they think about Dad running for Attorney General?
Well, you know, when you have teenagers, pretty soon they don't think much about Dad at all. You know, they like it and they're supportive. I don't require them to go to events. I let them live their lives. It's hard right now because they have a lot of events, and it bothers me that I'm missing out on some things. But my children, I think, understand that and I'm hoping that I'm teaching them kind of the principle of what Teddy Roosevelt said about the man who gets in the ring, and that it's not the man who wins or loses or the ones, but it's getting in the ring and trying to do what's right. I love that kind of thinking, and I'm hoping that I'm instilling in them and doing this and showing them how hard you work, and that you're working for a kind of a principle and an idea of public service that they learn from that, and I think they do. I think they both appreciate it. Maybe not as much as you think. They're worried about other stuff, but they do.
Okay. So let's just say things go as in your favor. You win in November. Sometime in January, you take office. What's the first thing you do?
Well, the first thing I do, I think, is obviously like any other large office or agency, you assess who your people are. There are a lot of very capable people working in the office, and you have to realize, the Attorney General's office is one of the largest, one of the most powerful offices in the state. There's some 700 lawyers. I think I looked it up, about $500 million budget. And it's incredibly large. And so first thing I think you'd have to do is make a clear assessment of the personnel and what you do. That's the more mundane thing. But, the things that I really want to change about it or where it is now is really probably the first thing I would look at is assess some of these lawsuits and assess what we can do about some of these, what I call them, public policy lawsuits. There's been a lot said, and there's a disagreement I have with Greg Abbott and really against Ken Paxton about the lawsuits against the federal government. I'm not saying that you don't have disagreements with the federal government. I've never said that. And I'm not saying that you don't fight for Texas, as people like to say. But here's the thing, and what's gone on in the Attorney General's office for a long time is one of the things I've talked about, is that, in branches of government, as a lawyer, I've learned is that a lawsuit should never be the first resort. In other words, what we've heard from Greg Abbott is about how I get up and sue President Obama. I don't agree with that rhetoric. Not necessarily, even if you want to talk lawsuit by lawsuit. That's very, very complicated. But I certainly don't want to have the rhetoric that we sue the federal government as a first thing we do. And I think Ken Paxton says that kind of seems to be one of the few kind of campaign things he mentions in his literature. I disagree with that. I think a lawsuit should be a last resort, particularly when you're spending the taxpayer dollars suing other portions. So I think that's wrong. I think that it should never be a campaign promise. That's what I say. A lawsuit should be the last resort and never a campaign promise. And that's one of the things, I think, an attitude I would change. And when you talk about public policy lawsuits, the biggest one that I think needs to be looked at right now, seriously by the Attorney General's office, is the lawsuit against our own school districts. If you look at it, the Attorney General's office is in charge, and it's defending the state in a lawsuit brought by 2/3 of the school districts right now, and it's taking the position that children, against school children in the state, and delaying litigation and basically taking a litigious approach to solving our school finance crisis. The judge has ruled against the state twice now, and I think that it's time and that the Attorney General's office basically tries to resolve that, get the dollars out of the courtroom and into the classroom, work out a solution and make you can't appropriate money as the Attorney General. I understand, and you defend the state, but I think a more balanced approach than what's been taken, which seems to be litigate, as opposed to let's work with other areas of government. The Constitution does require us to adequately fund public schools, and as the Attorney General, that's part of your job. So that'd be one of the first lawsuits I'd look at. I'd take a hard look, though a lot of these lawsuits are kind of still going on, but I would have a different policy, I can tell you, about the approach you take to voting rights. I tend to believe that the Attorney General has an obligation not just to one party, or the Republican Party, which is where it's been under Greg Abbott, but to all Texans, and to ensure that Texans have the right to vote. We worry about voting fraud, but instead of a measured approach, we see litigation, and lawsuits over the voter IDs. Was there an approach made where we could solve the eating concerns about fraud, but open it up where it wasn't so difficult to vote? And I would never think that it should be a policy of the Attorney General's office to make it more difficult for people to vote. And I disagree with that. The gerrymandering, the hardline approach that was taken towards all of that, that would be something I would take a hard look in my office. And again, I'd hope that I would never take a principled position or a hardline position from the Attorney General's office that would benefit Democrats, you know? Mm-hmm. It should not be that way in the Attorney General. It shouldn't benefit Republicans or Democrats. It should benefit the people of Texas. So I would work on all of those things. And, you know, and then also the third thing, again, just while we're at it, I mean, I'm talking a lot, but I guess we have 30 minutes. But I would really try to focus more and try to get the resources more on some of the more day-to-day things and mundane things in the office. Can we improve our Consumer Protection Division? One of the things that I've talked to a lot of people about is that division, which there's a lot of hardworking men and women in that division, and but you know, always in these agencies or in these offices, it comes from the top down. And what is the emphasis and the rewards and the kind of, you know, unspoken word about what we do about investigating payday lenders, investigating elderly abuse, investigating companies they're defrauding citizens. How is that going to be perceived at the top? And I think more effort needs to be placed there. We are having the Texas Miracle, as the Republicans like to talk about. That's fine. But I can tell you, in any type of boom economy, you get good businesses and not so good. And the Attorney General's office is one of the bastions or last hope for a lot of people to make sure they're not being cheated. So I think that needs to be looked at. Environmental protections, open records. I mean, obviously journalists are always interested in those. Those are just, you know, kind of the things that I'd want to look at right off the bat and start trying to improve.
Do you believe the Child Support Division in the Attorney General's office is doing an adequate job, and would you make any changes there?
You know, that's a really good question. I've thought about it. That'd be actually one of the things I'd really need to, I think, in all fairness, to start the job and look into it. Now, there's, you know, because I've read the numbers, and there's, you know, record numbers and large amounts of money. It's a great program to have in the Attorney General's office since it's happened. Though I've heard of problems. And I'd want to make sure, because there's been some issues about maybe overzealous litigation, some people not being treated fairly, and I'd want to make sure that I could improve, whether it was improve, change, but it would just be my policy that all people, because a lot of times these people in that division, they don't have lawyers. They're dealing with lawyers, they're dealing with collections, and it's on both sides. I'm certainly not sympathetic with, you know, parents who aren't supporting their children, but they need to be treated fairly. And the same with that, to make sure you're not doing more harm nor good in trying to get these dollars in. You know, the dollars are important, but lives are at stake, families are at stake, and under my system, I'd want to make sure that's being observed.
The Texas Attorney General is charged to defend the laws and Constitution of Texas and represent the state in litigation. To what extent do you believe federal overreach affects those duties?
Well, you know, if what you're talking, I mean, again, I've kind of touched on that, but here's what I think. Everybody, you know, and I've studied this, and every Attorney General, because you're the decision maker, has an obligation to defend the state. That is what you are. You are the lawyer for the state, just like I'm the lawyer for my clients. And sometimes my clients do things that I don't like. And I defend them. And that's my job, as long as you do it ethically and within the bounds of the law. And it's the same with the Attorney General's office. But you're also, the unique thing about it, and again, there's no, you know, the Constitution says some things, there's statutes. The job is really kind of transformed by what you make it when you get there. Different Attorney Generals have put their own impression on it. And you've got to remember that you defend the state, but you're also a public official. And so, you know, this notion that we're, you know, anytime we disagree with the federal government, that you jump in there and sue them, you know, that's not always the job of the Attorney General. I don't necessarily, you know, there's obviously going to be 10th Amendment and different issues that are going to go on and different disagreements about it. But, you know, any of these lawsuits that are undertaken, again, a lawsuit ought to be the last resort. It shouldn't be the campaign promise. And also, you need to make sure that all Texans are benefiting when you're running in there and you're saying, you know, if you're going to start asserting certain states' rights, are you now taking a position and plunging the state into a position where, in another case involving another state, it's going to harm Texas citizens? Because we've got to remember all this, always. I mean, it's real easy to say, to raise a flag and do all this rhetoric, but you need to be mindful of tax dollars at work, and that even though we are Texas citizens, proud to be one, we're also United States citizens. And so our actions now in this state may or may not help certain citizens, may harm other citizens, a certain lawsuit. So not everybody's, it's not everybody's interest always. And we may take a precedent that in another state may assert that harms us. It costs us tax dollars. And that's very complicated, but what I want to say is this about it. Don't use the state and the federal government as campaign rhetoric to stir people up. Think about it, be a public servant, and do the right thing. That's what I would say about that.
Greg Abbott was one of 11 attorneys general that basically sent a letter to President Obama warning him about illegal changes that they believe the president was making to the Affordable Care Act. And Abbott said he would continue a long legal battle about staying within the Constitution. You touched on it a little bit sooner, but do you plan to continue the plan that Abbott has begun? And
I do not intend to continue to spend tax dollars. I think there's been plenty of litigation involving the Affordable Care Act. It's time to stop that. Let everything continue on. Now, if there are issues that arise with the Affordable Care Act that can be tweaked, but this notion of continuing to try to turn down dollars that have harmed Texans, to continue to try to stop a system when there's evidence that it's starting to work, to not basically attempt to support legislation that's been passed by Congress, signed by the president. At some point, that's got to stop. The rhetoric has to stop, and you have to stop all the timely, costly. How much have we spent in dollars fighting the Affordable Care Act? And we haven't won. It's over. I wouldn't continue to take positions. I'm not going to say I wouldn't ever if I thought there were certain Medicaid dollars that could come. Yeah, that's obviously I'd always be interested in that. But to the point that you're trying to dismantle the legislation, throw everything into chaos when we've had it for years, I wouldn't do that.
You're running statewide in a huge state like Texas. Have there been any Texans along the way or any interesting stories that you've run into that really stand out off the top of your head along the campaign trail?
Man, I couldn't think of the name of the town. I was in Wise County today. But, I don't know that I could say that any of them stand out because every time I go somewhere, something interesting happens. I meet somebody that amazes me. I see some site I hadn't thought of. I saw Goliad one time. We were in Goliad, and I'd went to the fort in Goliad, and people don't think of Goliad. I saw one of the first two-year universities today that was just up on a hill in Wise County. I see somebody's old auction house, or different things that people do in East Texas. I meet people that are so political and fighting so hard and so principled in little small towns and understand so much that it's just amazing. So am I going to say that there's one thing? No, every day stands out on this. I love it. I was telling you before, it's people that talk about running for public office. There's parts that are no fun running statewide. The part that I enjoy the most, though, is that I've actually gotten to see and meet all kinds of people, and it reminds me again of how important it is that we have good government and that we have balanced government and that we have people that are in positions of power who aren't going to abuse it and who you can trust.
What about yourself do you think sets you apart from the pack? What makes you the ideal candidate for Attorney General?
I'm not going to say I'm the ideal candidate, but I can tell you I'm the better candidate, and here's why. The most important thing about the Attorney General's office is you have to have, just like any lawyer when the state hires a lawyer, you have to be able to trust your lawyer. You have to believe that your lawyer is being open and honest. And I'm not the first one to say that Mr. Paxton has issues with trust, issues that have arisen in the past as a state representative. And I'm not going to get personal, but it's not personal when you talk about the record. And he has a record as a state representative of not complying with the ethics laws, of doing business with the state when he was a state rep and not disclosing that. And then, oops, I forgot, And then what arose in the primary was a significant issue. There had been a history of where he had solicited people, some of his own clients, for an investment counselor who happened to be a friend of his. He wasn't registered as required by the state securities laws. He took a fee, a fairly significant fee, from those people. When he got caught, he had admitted that he solicited the people, wasn't registered for a state investment counselor, and took a fee. Well, that happens to be a felony. He should know it was a felony because as a state representative, he voted to enforce these laws under the Securities Act. And since that's happened, since he got caught, admitted to the State Securities Board he'd done it, waived any right to appeal, paid a small fine, but that doesn't do away with your criminal problems. It's just more like a confession. And now there's been a complaint filed against him with the Public Integrity Unit. A grievance is pending. I don't know where we're at on that. But the Republicans raised it in the primary over and over. It wasn't just me. Dan Branch said it, Barry Smitherman said it, that he's not to be, you can't trust. And more so in this race. You know, he's not here tonight. He's not, I challenged him to a debate. I've said these things. He can answer for them. Stand up and debate me, tell me how I'm wrong. Nothing. His spokesperson called that a desperate ploy. To debate, really? He hasn't gone to the papers as far as I can tell. In fact, I know at one point a reporter approached him in San Antonio to ask him questions and was literally blocked by his spokesperson and prevented from even answering any questions. So, you know, I can tell you, I'd put it to the voters or anybody that saw it. This man is running to be your attorney for the state of Texas. He's got, his opponent is basically saying, you've committed a felony, you've admitted it, but he won't answer to that. He won't debate and defend himself. He won't go to the papers and defend himself. He uses a spokesperson. He wants to be the spokesperson for Texas, and he uses a spokesperson? Really? And so, you know, it's real simple. If you won't defend yourself, how can we expect you to defend us in the state? Can't be trusted. And that's my message. And why am I better? Because I'm willing to get out and take questions from anybody, anytime. You can ask me anything. I've been open and honest about good and bad. I'm not perfect. Nobody is. But, you know, I think under my law practice, most people would say that I've been honest with people. Probably have some detractors. I bet any good lawyer may have some. But I'm willing to answer any questions, and I think that sets me apart from him by a long way.
Which advisory and enforcement responsibilities of the Attorney General's office will need the most attention and resources in the next 4 years, and how would you address them? So we're talking about
You're talking about just the general litigation, not the litigation,
right.
But just advising
right.
yeah, you know, probably the most attention may be pending legislation. And I think, you know, again, if you have pending legislation regarding school finance, there could be a bigger role. If there's pending legislation involving future, if it depends on it, to be honest with you, it depends on whether it's a Republican or a Democrat-dominated. If everybody wins or everybody loses, kind of what. But I could see a lot more role in some of the pending legislation involving school finance, if that's going to be an issue. A role in water rights, because just advising on certain legislation, because I think we're going to see that more, and more of the infrastructure, because all of these are going to be issues that we're facing in the future, and the Attorney General's office is going to take a role if requested, because that's when you give opinions on any legislation, and there may be opinions asked about legislation once it's passed by the proper authorities to request it. I do think that open records, there's been a lot of controversy about it, and that's a whole division that's going to require some scrutiny about what we do and don't release. What I think there's a problem about right now is maybe in the age of what's happening, people tend to hold the records more than they're supposed to under the Act. You know, it's kind of the major things I can think about right now. I mean, obviously all the agencies, as they do their jobs, would ask, but I think the most noteworthy thing I can think of right now would be the school finance.
Okay. And the Attorney General's office has been actively involved in questions regarding the separation of state and federal jurisdiction. What do you see as the role of the Attorney General in these issues?
Are you going back again, like the Red River or things like that? Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know, a lot of the lawsuits that were filed, the 26 that were filed, you know, they've lost a lot of those. The lawsuits against the EPA. When you hear about the rhetoric about the Red River, I mean, I was asked that today about, you know, they're saying there's a land grab. Well, there wasn't. I mean, it was rhetoric. All that was happening was the Bureau of Land Management was basically going to make an assessment of what the land was. Many times, and I think a lot of times, the Attorney General's office has gotten involved into whether or not there can be certain regulatory powers of federal government over industry. And the state's gotten involved when, in fact, maybe that industry should be the one spending the dollars and legislating about whether or not there was a federal overreach. Again, I can tell you, the nuts and bolts answer would be, if I really see an area of federal overreach, I would always try to work it out. But that's not going to be my focus in the Attorney General's office and what we're going to do. I think the dollars are limited on what the agency can do and what there's there, and I would rather there be more of a focus on helping the very everyday things, helping on consumer protection, good child support, instead of chasing after the federal government on what I perceive sometimes to be just rhetoric that may or may not benefit all Texans.
And Mr. Houston, thank you so much for your time. I'll give you the last word if you want to talk to the people at home.
Sure. Thank you so much to the league. And Darrell, thank you so much for this opportunity. I think this race comes down to one thing, and we can all have disagreements. I have a very Republican father-in-law, and we have many conversations. But when it comes down to it, we agree on most things that are good for most people. So really on the AG's race, whether you're Republican or Democrat, I think it comes down to who you can trust and who you think will be the most open and run that office in a better, more even-handed way. And I think it speaks volumes that my opponent is not here. I think it speaks volumes that he has all these issues that I've challenged him on and he won't answer to them. It either says, that he can't defend himself, or that he won't defend himself, or that he's unable maybe to speak well enough to do it. None of those speak very well about somebody who you want to be your next Attorney General. So I'm here. I hope people give strong consideration to my website, www.samhoustonfortexas.com. I have good ideas, and I want to be the lawyer for all the people of Texas and do the best job I can. Thanks again.
Okay. And we want to remind the people at home, this candidate forum is jointly sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Texas Education Fund and the League of Women Voters of Houston Education Fund. We invite you to visit our website for trusted and impartial election information at lwvhouston.org. Mr. Houston, thank you so much for your time.
And again, thanks to the League for giving me this time.
And we want to tell the folks at home to hang tight while we bring the next candidate. Good evening. I'm Darrell Douglas, and thank you for tuning in to the League of Women Voters Houston Education Fund and League of Women Voters Texas Education Fund conversation with the candidates. Tonight, you've heard from candidates that are running for both Attorney General and Texas Comptroller. We want to remind everyone that all the candidates on the ballot were invited. We allotted 1 hour to the show, to the program, and those who accepted came to the studio today. One of those people is Mr. Jamar Osborne, who's running for Attorney General. Who are you and why are you running, Mr. Osborne?
Hi, thank you for having me, and I appreciate this opportunity. I'm just an ordinary citizen who's really concerned about the direction that our government, particularly Texas, is heading with increased micromanagement of our everyday lives. And so I've been really active with the Occupy movement and activists throughout the state, and I have an organization called Citizens Against the Bar, which we're fighting to deregulate the practice of law and to help citizens get greater access to legal services. And so the Green Party contacted me and asked me if I would like to run for Attorney General. And I said this would be a great opportunity for me to inform the public about what's going on with the legal profession and their unconstitutional monopoly. And so that's mainly, but I have also, in addition to that, that's my main issue, is to deregulate the practice of law. But I have 5 issues, is to protect individual rights from mob rule, protect Texas residents from legislative action taken without constitutional authority, to lobby for legislative authority to serve as the legal agent for the purpose of accepting service of process on behalf of state defendants. Greater access for requesting Attorney General opinions. Right now, you have to be an authorized requester in order to request an Attorney General opinion, and if you're not a head of a state department or a governor or head of a legislative committee, then you don't get to do that. And I would like to make it more inclusive. And the last thing would be to protect the public's access to public records.
Okay. You mentioned, I think the 4th thing you mentioned was being able to ask the attorney, ask for, what was that?
Attorney General opinions.
Opinions. Okay. And right now, as it stands, only those that are head of commissions, on boards, or chairs of committees, the governor, can do that. You would like to expand that to whom?
Well, okay, I understand that you can't have everyone requesting Attorney General opinions, but you should at least be able to contact your state legislature and have your state legislature write a letter on your behalf requesting a legal opinion on different things, because if you don't have access to the governor or that's the whole purpose of the House of Representatives, that these people are actually supposed to serve the constituents directly. Like, they should have the ability to advocate for their constituents and to get Attorney General opinions.
Okay. Mr. Osborne, take us back to the moment that you decided, I'm running for Attorney General. Like, I'm seriously in this thing to run. What brought you there, and where were you?
Well, I had already filed my lawsuit against multiple defendants, the Supreme Court of Texas, well, now it's been amended. So, but essentially, it's the state of Texas, the Supreme Court of Texas, the bar, the Texas Bar, the Board of Law Examiners, and Travis County. And so this lawsuit had been going on for a few months at that point, and a lot of back and forth. And dealing with these people firsthand, I've seen that these people are corrupt. Like, I've heard a lot of speculations about this and that, but I've seen it firsthand. These people are corrupt. Particularly the Attorney General's office, they're not complying with discovery. They've been evading service. They're just not cooperating in any way, shape, or and it's just like, this is the government. I would expect this from someone on the street, not the government, and it's just outrageous.
So tell us a little bit more about you, where you're from,
Well, I'm originally from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Then I moved to Texas and went to high school. My dad lives in Fort Worth. And from there, I went into the military and I was stationed in Oklahoma. And, while I was in the military, I, went to undergrad and graduated. And from there, I went to law school and transferred into the National Guard and completed it. And after I graduated law school, I came to Texas, and I've been, really active with the activist community, and I've also gone on to complete my master's degree and just to be an advocate for issues that I think are important.
Okay. You mentioned earlier in your introduction about wanting to deregulate, was it deregulate
The practice of law.
the practice of law? Could you elaborate on that?
Well, it's just that the practice of law has gotten far away from what the original intent was. And so under the Constitution, you have a right to counsel, but that doesn't mean an attorney or a member of the bar. Under common law, you have the right to choose who you wanted to represent you in a court of law. And usually that would be a friend or a relative or, someone that you knew personally and trusted. Now you select a random stranger out of a phone book, and then they charge you $500 an hour, and you have no choice because the state has given these people a monopoly and has made it a crime for anyone who's not a member of the Texas Bar to even give legal advice. It's like, well, I have a constitutional right to freedom of speech. How can you tell me I can't give legal advice? And this is actually core political speech because it pertains to a core branch of government. So they have absolutely no authority to do what they're doing, and they want people to believe that this is to protect the consumers because we don't want just anybody practicing law and blah, blah, blah. That's all nonsense. This is mere economic protectionism. They're trying to limit the number of attorneys practicing so that they can charge as much money as they want. They're trying to eliminate the competition through artificial scarcity of legal services. And this is all documented. This goes way back to the 1930s when the State Bar Act was passed. Originally, and it's not just in Texas, it's all throughout the country, they were trying to keep out blacks, Jews, and immigrants from the practice of law. And so when you talk about it now, everyone sort of has this attitude of they don't want to hear it because like, oh, that was back in the 1930s. Well, if it was corrupt at its roots, it's corrupt today. It may not be, I don't know that they actually have racial, discrimination as an intent behind these policies, but the effect of it is definitely discriminatory because we know that African Americans fail the bar exam at a disparate rate, immigrants, and so Asians because of language barriers. And this bar exam has absolutely nothing to do with anything. It's just the most random and arbitrary standardized test in the country. It's like you get the 200 multiple choice essay questions, and there's no standards. I mean, when you have a standardized test, there has to be content validity and criterion reliability. And this is one of the things I'm trying to find on Discovery. What is the content validity and criterion reliability? They're not releasing this. They're keeping it secret because they know it has to be at least 70%. If it's not 70%, then it's not a valid test, and they don't want the public to know about it.
So let's just say, Mr. Osborne, that things go as you've planned, and November you win the election. What's the first thing you're going to do in January when you take office?
Well, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to change the entire direction of well, actually, I would like to get rid of some of these adjutants that are working there because I don't think that they are following the rule of law, and just get a whole new staff of people that are actually dedicated to the citizens and defending constitutional rights, and rather than protecting Greg Abbott and being one of his minions. I mean, that's what these people essentially are. They're not serving the public. And so, I believe in limited government. All this whole states' rights thing, that's one thing. But one of the important things about the Constitution that sort of gets swept under the rug is the Ninth Amendment, which says essentially that under common law, we had certain inalienable rights, uh, which are not enumerated in the Bill of Rights. However, we retain these rights as people. So this whole thing about the states' rights and, oh, well, we're the state, so we can regulate whether or not you can get married or whether or not you get an abortion. No, you can't do that. That's completely unconstitutional. Just because you're the state, there's no such thing as a state interest or a public interest. It's only about the individual, and the state's role is to protect individuals' rights. It's not to act as an adult babysitter and tell people what they can't do. It's more administrative rather than regulatory, and that's essentially what Greg Abbott has been doing. He's been filing all these lawsuits because it's a lot of hypocrisy. He doesn't want the federal government micromanaging the state, but he wants the state to micromanage the citizens. And I mean, I agree that Obamacare is probably unconstitutional, but it's a dead horse. It's here. We're stuck with it. So to file these lawsuits, I mean, this man has spent $3 million of taxpayer money, and these lawsuits are frivolous. 30 lawsuits, and he's only won 5 of them. And this is an outrage. I mean, I've seen his ads. You know, he's running for governor, and there's absolutely no substance. Basically, his platform is that I'm in a wheelchair, so vote for me. And it's like, well, I rolled myself up five flights of stairs. How does that make you qualified to be governor? I mean, at least Wendy Davis has a platform. She's like, you know, she has issues, and he doesn't seem to get that.
So what made you, what about yourself do you think makes you the ideal candidate to run for Attorney General?
What makes me the ideal candidate is that I am not a lawyer. I am a common person. I'm not an elitist. I'm not trying to get rich by exploiting poor people. All those things that these lawyers are doing, and they're going to be brought to justice at some point. So let's just get that out there right now. I'm coming after all of them. I'm not going to stop. I don't care what happens with this lawsuit. We're going to keep on pushing. I have supporters. I have activists all throughout the state. And so my purpose is to stand up for natural rights. You know, we have man-made law, but natural rights trump man-made law. And so if you actually listen to what my platform is, I'm far outside the mainstream. I'm not riding on someone else's coattail or being a puppet for a political party. Anything that comes out of my mouth is something that I came up with on my own. I'm not toeing the party line or anything like that.
You spoke earlier about your 5 the 5 things, I guess that's your platform. If you could sum up each one again, starting with 1.
Okay.
And if we could sort of talk about each one.
Okay.
Works.
Do you want me to just stop at one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Protect individual rights from mob rule. And that basically means that as citizens, we have individual rights. These rights are not subject to a public vote. Just because you personally don't agree that you don't support abortion or you don't support gay marriage or whatever the issue is, that doesn't mean that you have the right to come out to the polls and take away someone else's right and disenfranchise other citizens. That is unconstitutional. This is not a democracy. A lot of people like to throw out the word democracy. I don't know why, because it's nowhere in the Constitution, neither at the federal level nor at the state level. We have a Republican form of government, and under the Republican form of government, the government's role is to protect our individual rights. So mob rule, we need to get rid of that, and that is what I intend to fight for or against if I am elected as Attorney General.
Okay.
The second one is to protect Texas residents from legislative action taken without constitutional authority. Now, there are a lot of laws that get passed that, a lot of these laws are actually old. I don't know about any recent ones, but the State Bar Act is a prime example of something that's completely unconstitutional. It took a lawsuit back in 2003 to overturn the sodomy laws. It's like you don't even have a right to engage with a partner of your own choice in the privacy of your own home. And this is just 2003. This isn't something that happened in 40s or something. It's just like there's a lot of books on the law right now that need to be overturned, and anything that they're trying to do in the future, we need to, nip it in the bud. If they're trying to define marriages between a man and I don't know what they're trying to do, but anything that comes up that's an infringement of individual rights is going to be a red flag for me as an attorney general. Third one is to lobby for legislative authority to serve as legal agent for the purpose of accepting service of process on behalf of state defendants. Now, when you're filing a lawsuit against the state, it's not so easy to get it served. I mean, the Secretary of State sort of accepts service on behalf of state defendants, but there is no actual statute or official policy that gives them the authority to accept service. And many other states, they actually do have legislative authority to accept service. That authority is either given to the Attorney General or the Secretary of State. But in Texas, it's sort of ab lib, like, oh, well, we're going to accept it today, but we don't know I don't like that. I just think everything should be transparent. You should know if you're going to sue the government, who's going to receive service, and it should not be some thing that you have to figure out and hope that you get right, because if you don't get it right, then your entire lawsuit is dismissed. Fourth, greater access for requesting Attorney General opinions. As I explained before, there are a very limited list of individuals who are authorized to accept, to make requests for Attorney General opinions, and I just think that it's too restrictive. I mean, Greg Abbott has been using all of this time filing all these lawsuits against the federal government. He could be using more time doing what his constitutional authority is or responsibility is to, it's two responsibilities, actually three, but the main two are to represent the state in lawsuits against the state before the Supreme Court, and also to give legal opinions. And so those are his primary responsibilities. All these things that he's doing against Obama and all that stuff, that's fine, but you need to stick to your core functions before you start jumping off into something else. And so I would like to spend more time so that the citizens can know what the law is and how it applies to them, and it can be up there for everyone to see. There's not a secret about it, and I don't know. I mean, I would be interested to see what type of issues people would like to know if they were given the opportunity to ask.
Let's talk voter ID. What are your plans if you...
I'm sorry, there was one more. Do you want to address
go ahead.
that?
Yes.
The last one was to protect the public's access to public records. Now, there is an official process for requesting public records. However, if you request public records and you don't dot your I's and cross your T's, what the trick that they do is they'll say, well, we're not required to do research for you. So it's like, well, actually, you're going to have to do research regardless. I mean, if I request a public record, you need to do whatever you need to do to figure out how to get it. I mean, I don't have this information, and the public should have access to whatever information they want. And anyone who doesn't comply with the public record request should be prosecuted, because that is the Attorney General's responsibility. Okay, I'm sorry. Now that was the last 5 points.
Okay. And I guess now going on to voter ID, what are your plans for voter ID moving forward if you actually...
I think that voter ID is important because we need to know who's voting, and I mean, there has been some voter fraud, so I don't see any problems with that. I don't even know what the issue is with that. I mean, you have to identify people.
Okay. The child support division with the Texas Attorney General's office, do you think it's running well? And if not, what changes would you make?
Okay, what I saw on Greg Abbott's website was that he had posted a photo of someone that he had convicted of a felony for not paying child support, and the scaffold law, I just think is a little bit overboard, because to make it a felony to not pay child support is sort of counterintuitive. It's like, well, the goal is to get these people paying child support. If they're thrown in jail, this particular individual was thrown in prison for 18 months. And so it's like, okay, before we had that, the way of enforcing child support evasion is with sanctions. The court has authority to, they can fine people, they can sentence them up to 6 months in prison. I mean, I feel like that is sufficient. To have a felony, when you have a felony, you can't vote. I mean, you probably, it's going to be difficult to, you can't serve in the military. I mean, I just think it's overboard. And it's just like, that's not the goal of, the goal is to get people back on track and to help them. It's not, I mean, child support is I don't know. I know a lot of people are going to have a lot of opinions about child support and say, well, if you if you don't pay child support, you're just a scum and blah blah blah. But I just believe in personal responsibility and limited government. If you decide to have a child with someone who's not a good provider, you should be left to deal with the consequences of your actions. You should not be turning to the government to come save you because you chose not to protect yourself. You chose not to. I mean, I'm not all about traditional and all that stuff, but when it comes to family, I am a proponent for a two-parent household, and so I don't believe that child support act necessarily goes towards the child in all cases. And I think that anyone who's paying child support should have the right to demand records for how this money is being spent.
What changes need to be made immediately at the Texas Attorney General's office? If you had to just name one, what would be the main thing?
The main thing is that these people need to be instructed that they are public servants. I mean, I don't know what they've been taught, but they seem to think that the public serves them. They seem to think they're above the law. They have no respect for their constituents, and it needs to stop.
Okay. The Attorney General's office has been actively involved in questions of state and federal jurisdiction. What do you see as the role of the Attorney General in these issues?
Well, this is an interesting question because, many people support limited government, but I don't think people really understand what that means, because it's like they support limited government because they don't want the federal government imposing on their lives. But I think that the state government can be just as intrusive or even more so. And so I just think that the Attorney General needs to have a limited government approach and protect individual rights. What Greg Abbott is doing filing those lawsuits is, I mean, I've already said that, I don't need to be redundant about that, but that is not his role. I mean, it's not to fight for states' rights. You should be fighting for the rights of the individual citizens.
Do you believe that the Consumer Protection Division of the Attorney General's office is doing an adequate job?
See, but I mean, it's hard to answer that question because I don't believe that is the government's role. I mean, well, I don't know. I believe in a free market. If you want to, I mean, I believe in the right to contract, and so if you voluntarily enter a contract, then you should be locked into those terms. So I know I don't have no answer for that question.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time today. Is there, I guess we'll give you 60 seconds to tell the people at home why they should vote for you this November.
You should vote for me because I am standing up for your constitutional right. I'm standing up for natural law. I'm standing up for common sense. And what's been going on so far is not common sense. And what I intend to do is put an end to the state bar monopoly over the practice of law. And I'm already active in the fight. I've been active with the activists throughout the state, and this lawsuit is moving forward. We're in a discovery process, and I think we're going to find out some interesting details about what's been going on with the state bar, and I'm sorry. That's all I have. I would appreciate your support, and I'm for the common man, and I'm not an elitist attorney. I'm just a common man, just like you.
Okay, well, thank you once again for tuning in tonight. We want to remind you that all of the candidates on the ballot were invited to appear tonight. We allotted 1 hour of the program for those who chose to accept, and those who were in the studio today were those that came. We want to thank the candidates for Texas Comptroller, Mike Collier, Deb Shafto, who were here earlier today, and our 2 candidates for Texas Attorney General, Sam Houston and Jamar Osborne. This candidate forum is jointly sponsored by the League of Women Voters Texas Education Fund and the League of Women Voters Houston Education Fund. We invite you to visit our website for trusted, impartial election information at lwvhouston.org.